we don't usually give a number, we give a range, because we don't want to misrepresent what this is. We just want to make sure, hey, listen, we think that the market would bear somewhere within this window. It's up to you as the owner of the property, or if you're buying the property, to decide where that number to either sell or purchase that property is going to be. Right? We're not here to really make decisions for clients. We're here to empower them to be able to feel comfortable about making decisions.
Real estate is really an opportunity. Most people are just not familiar. Let's change that.
Access granted.
What's up, guys? My name is Gus. I'm here with the commercial department.
And I'm Brad Maxson, another member of the commercial department.
And this is the commercial department podcast, where we kind of talk about commercial real estate related elements. Today we're going to be talking about broker pricing opinions.
BPOs, yes, sir.
Which is a really important part of understanding value for a property. Now, BPOs, in a nutshell, is essentially kind of like what would you say, like an estimated, it's literally an opinion of value by a broker, right?
Yep. So it's not going to match up with an appraisal or anything like that, where they get really in depth, all of that type of stuff. And still, a broker price opinion, we still go in depth. We check multiple different ways of how we assume the price of the building, whether it's through rents, the actual physicalities of the building, condition, whatever it might be.
Right.
But usually, broker price opinion gets pretty close to what you would expect the value to be once you get an appraisal.
Gotcha. So, but just for reference, it is not an appraisal. So, but typically you can get it to kind of get an idea of value. It's commonly used also when someone is looking to maybe refinance a property.
Yeah.
A broker pricing opinion may be utilized for that rather than getting an appraisal, but usually they will still want to get an appraisal to finalize even a refinance.
Yeah.
But the broker pricing opinion is one way that you can do that. Now, some brokers will offer this, some brokers won't. That's a service that we do offer. So if that is an interest of yours, you want to get an idea of a broker pricing opinion, that is something that we can support. And it can cover the value of the property. It can cover like how much do you want to charge or should you charge for a lease. If you want to buy a property, there's all kind of different ways that you can use it. Today, we're going to be talking primarily for like the value of a property for the sake of, let's say, a sale. Someone has a property, they want to get an idea of value, right? So what are some of the things that you're familiar with as it relates to broker pricing opinions? Like what kinds of things do we typically evaluate?
Gotcha. So one of the first things we go ahead and we want to make sure we have an understanding of, especially with commercial properties, is if there's tenants already in there. Because if there's some active leases going on, that's actually going to bring a lot more value to the property for that owner or seller, whatever they're going ahead and their prerogative is with the property. Having active leases in there, especially in at market rates, preferably on staggering leases as well. So if they were going to sell, the new owner doesn't have everyone wrapping up at the same time.
I see that.
Yeah.
That could be a real big problem. You have like, let's say 5 tenants and they're all leaving at the same time, or they go to renew at the same time and they all decide not to renew. You got an empty building, which would totally suck.
And now you've gone from an asset that has all of this income coming in to now you got to kind of figure it out.
Exactly.
So that's a huge one that we always go ahead and tell our clients to look out for. Another one obviously is condition of the building. We want to go ahead and check for any type of renovations that we might have seen. Also, we want to see if there is anything that we can do towards improvements, where there is, the roof is near the end of its life. End of its lifeline. Pretty much we want to evaluate, is it going to be worth it for us to do this now, or should we go ahead and just build it into the BPO, and are you comfortable with that? So it's a lot of questions on condition, making sure the leases are all set up, and then also just taking a look at the generic market around, because I mean, especially in commercial real estate, what's happening local to comparative properties impacts your property a lot.
So this gets into like the different ways that we evaluate property. So in residential real estate, for example, you have what's called a CMA, or a comparative market analysis, which a BPO will include that, but it's a little bit more comprehensive, because you have your comparables, which is just like a residential, where you go to another property and try to see if you can get something that's relatively similar, and then identify, essentially what the cost per square foot is, which in commercial, you're more likely to do a cost per square foot than you would be in residential, for example. Now, there are 2 other ways to value, and you kind of touched on that with income. So what's called the income approach, where we get the tenants, we identify what the income of the tenants are, identify essentially what the expenses are of the property, ultimately to try to figure out what the net operating income is. Once you identify the net operating income, you look into the market to see like, what are the traditional cap rates that are being utilized to purchase property, specifically investment property. Now, cap rates is just a calculation on how a property is assessed in terms of value. Usually we pull that from the market. The market kind of identifies what the cap rates are, what are people willing to pay for a building based on how it's performing, and then we would apply that to essentially establish some estimated value there. And then the other element that we'll look at, and this is very similar to how appraisers do this, but like I said, this is not an appraisal, is we'll look to see like what's called the cost approach, where we will actually identify what it would cost to replace this building and then minus the depreciation of the building. So you have, hey, it's going to cost this much per square foot to build this same building, but this building has been around for 25 years. We got to depreciate that 25 years, and then, you know, look at that. And of course, there's other things that you can take into consideration. You know, maybe it's 25 years old, but it was recently renovated 5 years ago, so the depreciation may not be as heavy because of that.
Reset that depreciation.
Yeah, stuff like that. So, you know, all that is to say is that, you know, the idea is to try to identify a number of different variables or different angles to figure out what value is, and then try to get like a average of those different ways of looking at it to establish essentially what the range of value would be for a particular property.
No, and at the end of the day, I mean, just like we mentioned before, and I actually wanted to ask you this, a BPO is going to really help us establish that range of value, but kind of diving into it compared to a CMA or market analysis or whatever, what is the limitations of a BPO that you've ran into compared to that?
Well, compared to a CMA?
Compared to a CMA or going ahead and doing a full market analysis of the building or whatever, really going ahead and moving forward with an appraisal when you're going through that process.
I mean, I think a BPO, so if I were to rank them in terms of like most accurate, I would probably rank, you know, and I'm not saying this to be like, oh, it's at the bottom, but it's the least accurate, which would be a CMA, which is basically where you just look at comps. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very useful in residential. In commercial, there's a number of different variables to consider, including income approach. And then, of course, if the building that you need doesn't exist, if you had to build it yourself, what would that cost? So a BPO is going to take those additional elements into consideration. So I would say a BPO is a slightly more comprehensive.
Next level up.
Yeah, from what would be considered a comparative market analysis. And then, of course, the actual, because we're not appraisers, you know, the value that we present is not really sticky, right? Like there's not any lender that's going to look at our broker pricing opinion and then make a full
definitive decision
based on that.
It can be contested.
Yeah, well, I mean, appraisals can be contested too, but I think that it's just because we're not licensed to do appraisals. You know, an appraisal is not, a BPO is not an official document. It is quite literally, as it states, an opinion of value, right? The appraiser actually identifies where they believe real value exists. So that's the difference between like a BPO and appraisal. Even if you do, because I mean, we do our best to try to follow a lot of the appraisers' standard operating procedures. Obviously, we're not as into appraisals as appraisers are, so they're going to be a little bit more comprehensive, have more of the latest techniques to identify value and stuff like that. So they may be a little bit more fine-tuned than what we're going to be able to do. But you know, but a lot of it depends on the broker who's actually doing the opinion of value. If they are not following a lot of those protocols that an appraiser does, then their opinion of value may not necessarily be as comprehensive. So
or even as aligned as what they might get once they get a real
correct.
appraisal.
Yeah. So I think that the opinion of value, because there's not really a standardization of opinion of value, it's never going to be seen quite as comprehensive as an appraisal, only because appraisers, they have to follow a specific standard, they follow specific techniques, this is something they do day in and day out. We don't necessarily do that day in and day out. We do it often it's very common for us to do a broker pricing opinion, but that's not our job to do that necessarily. That's just one aspect of identifying value to help our clients out.
Yeah.
So I would say an opinion of value is a really great place to start. If you have a property and you want to get an idea of value, that's a great place to start. But it is not a definitive, like, hey, this is what the value is. This is just our opinion based on these factors that we've taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then aside from for our sellers going ahead and establishing value when they are looking at an opportunity, whether to potentially sell, just get a price for it, whatever it might be, what other clients do you have coming to us right now? Pretty much looking for BPOs, looking to go ahead and get that done.
So, this is BPO is a really great tool to use if you're a buyer.
Yeah.
Because as a buyer, if you are trying to, so you want to buy a property and you don't, a property might be listed for $2 million. How do you know if that's actually a good value? And one of the things that we'll do is we'll do a BPO to kind of help identify whether or not that's actually a reasonable value or not. And depending on the type of purchase that it is, will help determine, whether or not they're willing to pay either that value, more than that value, less than that value. Because I think the buyer's motivations makes a difference. So the motivation, for example, for an operator, they're going to have a different motivation in terms of buying a property.
Yep.
They want to operate. Yeah, they want to operate out of that property, and they may be willing to pay a little bit of a premium for a property that'll help their operations. Maybe they're positioned on a heavy traffic like road or something like that.
Yeah, corridor or whatever.
Whatever the case may be, yeah. And they may be willing to pay a little bit of a premium for that, right? Where an investor may look at that same property, if there's no tenants in it, or maybe it's not fully leased up, they're not going to pay that premium, right? They're going to be looking at how it's performing, and they're going to be like, well, it's not really performing very well. I got to now find tenants. I might have to fix it up. It's great positioning, but from an investment perspective, it may not be ideal.
For cash flow, yes, sir.
Correct. So I think the buyer, the buyer's position makes a difference, but a BPO would help in either case, because we can identify value either by income approach as being the main element that they're thinking of, or just as a general system of value for an operator, for example. I've also used it. I've had clients who called me who have a property, they want to lease a property, and they don't know how much to charge for a lease. So one of the things that we would do is we would give an opinion of value for what a lease value would be. Like, how much should they be charging for a lease, so that they can kind of get an idea of what is the market going to bear, what is their threshold, like what things should they be considering? Should it be, are we seeing modified gross leases for this type of property? Are we seeing triple net leases?
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So those are the things that we have to look at, and and again, just because there's more, let's say right now, triple net leases are the most common that we're seeing in the market.
By far, yes, sir.
But that doesn't mean that a landlord may not want to do a modified gross. Mm-hmm. We just calculate all of the costs that would be involved and just, kind of adjust the pricing to make it sure that makes sense for the landlord. Mm-hmm. So, but a BPO would help with that too. So I've done a few of those where I've had clients give us a call and say, hey, listen, we want to lease this building. We'd like to do it ourselves, but we just don't know how much to charge and what considerations to take into, what things to take into consideration. So that's part of what we would do. We would give them a full analysis, identify where value is, and then give them kind of a blueprint of like, hey, listen, this is what you should do. This is what we're seeing in the market. This is what our recommendations. And then they go out and they market and find a tenant and do their own thing. Mm-hmm. So we've done that before as well.
And out of curiosity, because I haven't gone ahead and ran into this yet myself, but have you done a BPO or been a part of BPO yet that was not even close to what the appraisal value is coming at?
Not really. I mean, I've been lucky, I guess. I really do. I make a really. I really try to take into consideration how an appraiser might look at the property, mm-hmm. and I try to follow as much of the protocols that I'm familiar with that they would necessarily follow.
So at least in the ballpark.
Yeah, so I think for the most part, and again, so like an appraiser will give you a number, right? They'll say, hey, this property is worth $1.25 million, right?
As opposed to
right, a BPO is going to give you a range. Like the range for a BPO for that same property might say, well, we think it's worth 1.1 to 1.35, right?
Yeah.
So we think that's where the range is. So we don't usually give a number, we give a range, because we don't want to misrepresent what this is. We just want to make sure, hey, listen, we think that the market would bear somewhere within this window. It's up to you as the owner of the property, or if you're buying the property, to decide where that number to either sell or purchase that property is going to be. Right? We're not here to really make decisions for clients. We're here to empower them to be able to feel comfortable about making decisions.
And speaking of clients making the decisions, do you feel like our clients, whether our clients or in general commercial clients in the market, have any major misconceptions in regard to BPOs?
I think a lot of clients are not aware of what a BPO is. I would say that's probably the most common thing is, I mean, they usually have an idea of like, oh, can I get like some kind of a market analysis, but they don't necessarily know like what is taken into consideration,
or even some of the information that we might request from them on that.
Correct, exactly. So a lot of times they'll just ask us, hey, this is my building, how much is it worth? And then I have no information other than square footage, and I could pull comps, but
and go into the tax records.
I could do stuff like that, but that's going to give you just part of the picture. So what really helps to understand value, and depending on the property, like comps. So you might do there's three different things, right? So you have your comps, you have your income approach, and you have your construction replacement, right? And the thing is that depending on the type of property that you have, you might lean heavier on one than the other. So let's say you have a property that is an investment property, and it's fully leased up, and you have really great tenants, right? But the similar properties in the area like yours sold for, let's say, $1.5 million, right? And if, based on square footage, on the cost per square foot. But the property you have really performs well from an income perspective. And from the income perspective, you might be at $2.5 million. Well, if that's the case, I mean, we don't want to list at 1.5. 1.5 would not be the value for you. You would really be at 2.5 because your income justifies that price point. Right. So, so I think it's important. I think the most important thing to understand is if you have a property and you want to get a value on it, and when you're working with a broker, really providing them as much information on the property as possible is going to help them to understand how to value the property. Without that information, they're only able to give you a portion of the picture. If I just pull comps, but you have a really great performing property, the comps may not have performed as well as your property does. And then now I'm giving you a number that you're like, oh, I would never sell it for 1.5, but you might sell it for 2.5.
Exactly.
But I didn't know it was worth 2.5 because I never got the information on the property. So I think a lot of it is just not understanding the various dynamics that are involved in putting together a broker pricing opinion. So I think those are that would be the biggest thing, is that a lot of people just don't necessarily understand the nuances that come with putting putting a opinion of value to the property. Because I get that all the time. I mean, people call me all the time and they're like, well, how much do you think it's worth? Like, I have no idea. I need more information, right?
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point earlier as well, of going past the BPO of how much do you think it's worth. Also, how much do you think it's worth to who? Because again, whether it's, like you mentioned, whether it's an operator, whether it's an investor, that can drastically change the prerogative of how much they're willing to pay for that property.
Absolutely. And that's part of the things that we'll do too, like when we do an assessment of a property, because there's a couple of different ways for a property owner. They can go a couple of different directions. They can hold the property and just continue cash flowing it. They can sell the property, of course. They can make adjustments to the property. They can reposition the property to perform better for a sale or for holding, right? So we've done all of those things. And I think it's important to note that, when having a consultation, understanding all your options is really important. And then also understanding if you decide, let's say you do want to sell, like identifying who the most ideal client would be. So, if you have an empty building, there's very few investors that are going to want to buy an empty building. But a lot of operators would love an empty building, right? So if that's the case, then you want to sort of structure or rather position the building to be ideal for an operator. And what can we do to make that more ideal for an operator? If you want to make it for an investor to buy it, then we should probably fill it with tenants first and then sell it with tenants. Because then an investor is going to want to buy it.
They're going to eat that up.
Right. So it all depends. A lot of it depends. And then, part of the broker pricing opinion will identify what's going to likely bring the most income for you. So, we would identify here, hey, listen, if you sold this as an investment property, you can get X. If you sold it as just for an owner-operator, you can get Y. And then, we might make justifications to help you understand, like, we should probably sell this to an operator. They're more likely to buy it, and they'll probably pay more for it than an investor would. Because, again, depends on the property. A good example of that would be, let's say, an operator would probably would be more likely to buy a single tenant space, right? Where you can't do multiple tenants anyways, or maybe you can only do 2 tenants, right? But an operator would be more likely to buy a space like that than, let's say, a plaza with 5 units or more, right? So, you want to help the owner of the property understand, like, who is the most ideal client. A BPO will help them understand the numbers to help justify, well, which direction should we be going in? At least that's the idea.
At least.
Yeah. So, I know that you're right now working on a broker pricing opinion for a property that's in Claremont. What are you finding in that process? Like, what do you was there anything that you were surprised to see, or anything that really captivated you about the process of putting that together?
I would say, because I've always gone ahead and done my BPOs, CMAs, all of that on the residential side, getting into the commercial side. One of the things that really shocked me was how common it was that a lot of these owners went through and actually have done major replacements to the property, whether it's going ahead and completely renovating the inside, whether it was just 5 years ago they just did it before and the change of hands did it again. Another one would go ahead and I'm surprised by how many smaller single unit buildings are having turnover right now. At least in the last year or so, I thought the market slowed down a little bit in commercial, but there's a lot of smaller commercial deals out there that didn't necessarily match up to the property that we're doing, but I just found interesting that, wow, these types of units are flipping hands right now. So I'd still say it kind of surprised me when it came to the activity. It surprised me when it came to the renovations that I'm seeing. Also, the cost of renovations compared to residential. But aside from that, I'd say everything else is pretty much in my ballpark to what I expect from residential.
Yeah. In terms of identifying the property, and I got you. Oh, very cool. So, I think the biggest thing for broker pricing opinions for anyone who has commercial property or is interested in a commercial asset is a broker pricing opinion is a really great way to help a seller or a buyer or even a landlord, not so much tenants, because typically you can kind of see what's going on in the market. They can do their own math. But I guess it could, in theory, help them, but I've not had to do one for a tenant yet. But I think the broker pricing opinion is a really great place to start to help a seller understand where they can potentially sell their property, like what they can sell their property for. And then also in doing the broker pricing opinion, we're able to identify like what are the other options and like what is going to be the highest return on their, for their investment that they have, when they're going to sell. And then when if someone's going to buy, you're on the opposite end of that. Like, is this going to be worth it for me?
Yeah.
Like, and then you can also identify, the broker pricing opinion will help with projections as well, because you can identify here, this is current value, and then if we were to do ABC, XYZ, updates, upgrades, put tenants in, so on and so forth, we can then project value on that other side too, because in theory, you would have like a ballpark of what the costs to run the building are, right? And then you can project forward what they could potentially do if you want to increase market rates or something like that. Yeah. So I think a broker pricing opinion is really a good place to start when considering either a sale or a purchase. Potentially, like I said, a landlord who wants to just kind of lease up the building themselves. They don't necessarily want to use a broker. A broker pricing opinion is probably a really good way to do that as well.
Yeah, at least let them know where they are and know, okay, if I were to take these steps, whether I follow the broker price opinion on some type of repositioning elements, or if I'm comfortable taking it as is, they know exactly where their building would sit in a range at least.
Yeah, and the repositioning is a whole other animal. We can probably address that in another podcast, but that is a very powerful tool. I had a repositioning project, and the property when we did the broker pricing opinion on that one, it priced out based on primarily the income approach because it was an investment property. So we leaned heavily on the income approach at like 1.7 million. But we spoke with the owner and we advised them that if they brought the rents up to market rates, we could get up to 2.4 for that building. So that would have been a difference of like $800,000 roughly. So in that particular case, the owner decided that they just wanted to get rid of it. But we did the math on it, and even with all of our costs for leasing it up and putting in new tenants and doing the sale and everything, I mean, they still would have walked away with an additional like $600,000 in addition to what it actually sold for.
Yeah.
So repositioning is a really, really powerful tool, and that again we can talk about on another podcast. But I the fact that you brought it up, I think is just important for people to understand the power of a tool like that.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. And also, I mean, just last point on it as well is it's really up to the owner, because even though we're waving another $600,000 in front of their face, their whole entire thing was, I want to get it done with rather than I want to spend the time.
Correct.
So really, it's all. I mean, that's what it always comes down to.
Yeah,
Everyone's prerogatives.
We don't make decisions, right? We just let them know, hey, this is the options. You guys, you take, you let me know how you want me to proceed. So, but that's pretty much it. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about as it relates to that?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay.
You answered a lot of misconceptions as well, which I think cleared up a lot for the viewers. And I think we pretty much covered what a BPO would be. So I think we're good to go.
Well, if you guys have any questions on, on what a broker pricing opinion is, or you'd like to have one done on a property that you have or a property you're interested in, let us know. You can comment below or just reach out to us directly at our website, the commercial department, abbreviated DEPT.com. And we're happy to help. So we appreciate you. My name is Gus.
I'm Brad.
And this is the Commercial Department Podcast. We will see you guys next time. Peace.
Cool.